Space Engineers combat has always been really fun to me. I enjoy spending my nights blowing people up with artillery rounds, but I feel that combat has gotten a little standardized and that there needs to be more opportunities to branch out and try different weapons. And the current game really doesn't offer that, as the best weapon is the railgun, and most people just stack a lot of railguns, and people, not even artillery turrets, are that useful compared to the railgun. So I'm going to provide my take on how I would update the combat system to make it a little more fair and balanced and make weapons more comparable to each other in terms of power. For starters, I think that artillery turrets should have a buff. Um, I see them as sort of like your main balanced turret. They deal all right damage. They have an all right reload time. They have all right amount of block health. There's nothing really outstanding about them, but there's nothing really bad about them either. And currently, I feel that their velocity makes them somewhat useless in combat, as it's hard to hit people outside of a 600-meter range, and most good PvPers in this game know to just press S when you're getting close to them so that you don't get in that close and you can always jump to get out of range. So it's very hard to get into a position where artillery turrets are useful. So buffing the velocity of artillery turrets to 750 meters a second would make them a lot easier to hit players and make them more widely used and useful on ships. The next change that I would make has to do with rockets. Both the rocket turret and rocket pods in this game aren't very good. I'm aware that rocket pods, when they connect, can do a lot of damage, especially in large numbers. However, with their velocity being so slow and the range being only 800 meters, it's nearly impossible to hit anyone with rocket pods. And let's not get started with rocket turrets, which only have mediocre damage per second and suffer all of the drawbacks of the rocket pod and have a lower fire rate. I feel that rockets don't have a place in the PvP of this game without a huge buff, but I don't really know how I would buff them or how I would buff them that seems realistic. So for the time being, I'd say that it would be best if rockets are just removed from the game or just forgotten about entirely. The next change that I would make is adding some sort of HE heavy gun. Something that you could hit another ship with and it would deal a significant amount of damage if you connected. I think that something comparable to maybe a small grid warhead or a little bit less powerful than that would be a good amount of damage, and its velocity could be down at 400 to 500 meters a second, so it's very easy to dodge it. I think that this would be a worthy addition because the role of a big HE gun hasn't been filled in the current PvP scenario, and rockets, which I just went over, don't really fit that. So we kind of need that big heavy hitting gun where it's not super useful in combat, but if you can blindside someone and hit someone with it, it pays off. I think there's also another weapon that could be added. This one is a little bit more tried by the community, and that would be some sort of railgun turret. I think one small grid railgun, basically just a default small grid railgun on a turret, would be pretty worthwhile. They do alright damage, but their main thing is their bullet velocity, which is really high. I'm thinking that the game should be balanced in a way where you trade off bullet velocity for bullet damage, since a lower velocity means you'll get hit less, so you're going to take less damage from it anyways. So the things that deal bigger damage would pay off more if you can, get in close and blindside someone, but the things that are faster would work better in 1v1 fights where they have a much better opportunity of hitting the target. I feel like a lot of people have been going through and making a bunch of these subgrid railgun turrets, and I don't hate that, but subgrid railgun turrets have a couple of downfalls, mostly being pretty fragile. If you hit them, they just kind of go poof, and the railgun turrets would be capable of, auto repair and be a lot less janky and server consuming than stuff like small grid railgun turrets. And then the final change that I would make, I think, is somewhat controversial in a way, and that would be adding homing missiles. Now, you might be asking, why the hell do you want to add homing missiles? Because they go kind of against everything you stand against in this game. You don't want a new player to just be able to stack a bunch of guns on one massive grid and then just fire them all at once and win. That's not fair, and no, it isn't. However, I feel that homing missiles could be very effective at dealing with a specific play style that we've all become too familiar with now, which is the metabrick. Metabricks have kind of plagued the space engineers community for as long as railguns have been out. People just building these really fast ships with gravity drives that just stack a bunch of railguns and kite you, and you really can't do anything about it. So I think adding some sort of homing missile with like a 3 kilometer range, and on that note, upping the view distance so that you can actually see people and then they actually stream in before combat. This is like super duper important, but you can do this in your custom worlds. But Keen, please update the default view distance so I can actually see people. Thank you. Adding homing missiles would pose a legitimate threat to metabricks. The homing missiles in this case would home well enough to be able to deal with metabricks and be able to catch up to them, with like a 200, 300 meters a second velocity. Nothing crazy, so it takes you of time to see them and react to them, but fast enough that they're going to be able to catch anyone. But you may be asking, doesn't this upset game balance? Like, what are you going to do against homing missiles? And the answer is Gatling turrets. Now you might be saying, but the Gatling turrets suck, and that's my final point. Gatling turrets do suck. They're not terrible, but they get outdamaged by a lot of things, and most importantly, they aren't accurate. They have a lot of spread. They're basically a shotgun that doesn't fire all of their pellets at once. It's very inaccurate, and if Keen made the Gatling turrets perfectly accurate, that would solve so many problems, because then they could actually go and shoot down homing missiles with relative efficiency, making Gatling turrets actually useful against shooting down things such as homing missiles would add another layer to space engineers' combat and make it so that there's sort of two types of fights going on. There's like the, big guns and then rail guns and like speed sort of fight, and then there's the missiles versus your Gatling turrets, which are essentially acting as your PDCs. It would make it so that in order to have a viable combat ship, you need a reasonable spread of all the turrets and near reasonable spread of weapons. Because if you don't have homing missiles, you're going to get kited out and get destroyed. And if you don't have Gatling turrets, you're going to get hit by homing missiles. It just adds more stuff for people to interact with. And I think that's one of the things that makes a combat system in any game great, is just more stuff, more depth to it. So yeah, that's my opinion on the Space Engineers combat system and how you could make it better. Please argue with me in the comments. It would be awesome. I will respond to all of your arguments. And I even know that you might even argue with me in Discord. There's a lot of places you can argue with me. Please do that. I'd love to respond to it. Anyways, bye.